The emergency council chamber of the Galactic Federation hummed with desperate energy. Representatives from 12 star systems sat around the crystalline table, their various forms of distress unmistakable despite their alien physiologies. The Zelthani ambassador's tentacles writhed anxiously, while the Korthek delegate's chitinous shell clicked repeatedly against his chair. "The situation grows worse by the hour," announced Chancellor Vexhai, her blue-scaled face grim. "The Devourers have consumed another 3 systems in the Outer Rim. At their current rate of expansion, they'll reach the core worlds within 2 standard cycles." A collective shudder ran through the assembled delegates. The Devourers were unlike any enemy the galaxy had faced before. They didn't conquer worlds or extract resources. They consumed everything. Planets, stars, even the vacuum of space itself seemed to wither in their wake. Entire civilizations simply ceased to exist, leaving behind only empty void where star systems once thrived. "Our combined fleets are proving insufficient," reported Admiral Theclon, his forearms gesturing helplessly at the holographic display showing their dwindling forces. "We've lost 60% of our ships in the last engagement. Their technology adapts to our weapons faster than we can deploy new ones." The room fell silent except for the soft hum of the life support systems. Each delegate knew what this meant. The Galactic Federation, an alliance of over 300 species spanning thousands of light years, was facing extinction. Their most advanced weapons, their greatest minds, their strongest warriors, none of it mattered against an enemy that seemed to violate the very laws of physics. "There must be something we haven't tried," insisted Counselor Yathara, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's light into desperate rainbows. "Some weapon, some strategy, some ally we've overlooked." Chancellor Vexhai's expression grew even more troubled. She activated her personal data pad and hesitated before speaking. "There is one option, one that our xenobiological archives suggest might possess the necessary qualities to combat this threat." "Then why do you hesitate?" demanded the Korthek delegate, his mandibles clicking impatiently. "Because the species in question is classified as a Level 7 danger rating. They've been under strict quarantine for the past 200 standard years. Forbidden from joining the Federation due to their unstable nature." The chamber erupted in alarmed murmurs. Level 7 was the highest danger classification, reserved for species so violent and unpredictable that contact was considered a threat to galactic stability. Only 3 species in recorded history had ever received such a rating, and 2 of them had destroyed themselves before achieving spaceflight. "You're talking about the humans," whispered Admiral Theclon, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and terror. Vexhai nodded slowly. "The inhabitants of the 3rd planet in the Sol system. Our initial contact teams labeled them as beautiful monsters, capable of incredible creativity and compassion, but also possessing a capacity for violence that defied all statistical models." She activated the holographic display, showing images that made several delegates recoil. Humans in primitive armor charging across battlefields despite overwhelming odds. Cities reduced to rubble, only to be rebuilt stronger than before. Individuals sacrificing themselves to save strangers, then others committing acts of breathtaking cruelty in the same breath. "Their entire evolutionary history is one of constant warfare," Vexhai continued. "Not just between species, but between members of their own kind. They've survived ice ages, supervolcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, and countless plagues. When their environment becomes hostile, they don't adapt, they make it adapt to them." "But they're primitives," protested Counselor Yathara. "Their technology is millennia behind ours. They've barely achieved faster than light travel." "That's precisely what makes them dangerous," Admiral Theclon replied grimly. "They don't follow established patterns. Where we see impossibility, they see merely another problem to solve. Our xenopsychologists believe their neural patterns actually prevent them from accepting defeat." The Chancellor brought up another series of images. Humans in primitive spacesuits, working on massive construction projects in the vacuum of space. Others showed human settlements on worlds that should have been uninhabitable, thriving in conditions that would kill most known species. "They call it the human spirit," she explained. "An intangible quality that drives them to achieve the impossible through sheer determination. Our scientists have studied it for decades and still don't understand how it works." "And you believe this spirit could somehow defeat an enemy that our most advanced civilizations cannot?" The skepticism in the Zelthani ambassador's tone was palpable. Vexhai was quiet for a long moment, staring at the tactical displays showing the Devourer's relentless advance. 6 months ago, I would have said no. But conventional wisdom has failed us. Perhaps what we need isn't conventional wisdom at all. She turned to face the assembly, her decision crystallizing. Humans have a saying, desperate times call for desperate measures. We are facing the extinction of everything we've built, everything we are. If there's even the slightest chance that these dangerous primitives possess something we lack, some quality that could turn the tide, don't we owe it to our people to try? The debate that followed was fierce and chaotic. Some delegates argued that unleashing humans on the galaxy would simply replace one extinction event with another. Others pointed out that extinction was already certain if they did nothing. Fear warred with hope. Prejudice battled desperation. Finally, Admiral Theclon stood, his massive frame commanding attention. I've spent my entire career studying warfare across the galaxy, he said quietly. I've seen courage, strategy, determination, but I've never seen anything like what the humans call going down swinging. They don't just fight until they lose, they fight until fighting becomes impossible. And then they find new ways to fight. He gestured to the display showing the Devourer's advance. Our enemy consumes everything in its path because it's never encountered anything that refused to be consumed. Perhaps it's time for an introduction. The vote was close, but desperation ultimately triumphed over caution. As the delegates filed out to prepare for humanity's first official contact with the Galactic Federation, none of them could have imagined that they had just set in motion events that would reshape the very nature of warfare itself. The message was simple, transmitted across 200 light-years to a small blue planet on the edge of a spiral arm. We need your help. What came next would prove that sometimes, the most dangerous species in the galaxy was exactly what civilization needed to survive. The United Earth Defense Council had seen its share of impossible situations, but nothing quite like this. General Sarah Martinez stood before the assembled representatives of every nation on Earth, watching their faces as they processed the information on their screens. Holographic displays showed star charts, alien vessels, and most troubling of all, the expanding void where entire solar systems used to exist. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, said Director Chen of the Asian Coalition, his voice carefully controlled. Aliens, actual extraterrestrial beings, have been watching us for 2 centuries, deemed us too dangerous for their galactic club, and now want our help because something is eating the universe? That's an oversimplification, but essentially accurate, replied Dr. Amanda Foster, Earth's lead xenobiologist. She had been among the first to examine the Galactic Federation's data packages. The entity they call the Devourers appears to be converting matter into energy and storing it in some kind of pocket dimension. Every world they touch simply stops existing. President Morrison of the North American Federation leaned forward, her expression grim. And they want us to fight this thing with what? We don't even have shields like they do, much less weapons that can crack planets. General Martinez activated the tactical display, showing Earth's current military capabilities alongside the Federation's technological marvels. The comparison was laughable. Human weapons looked like stone tools next to alien energy cannons and matter manipulators. That's exactly what makes this interesting, she said, surprising everyone in the room. They have all this incredible technology and they're still losing. Maybe the answer isn't better technology. The Federation ambassador, a tall, elegant being named Silthanor, had remained silent throughout the human discussions. Now he spoke, his translator rendering his words in perfect English despite the obvious alien modulation of his voice. We understand your skepticism, he said. Our own tactical analysts questioned the wisdom of this approach. But consider this. We have fought the Devourers using every conventional strategy known to military science. We have employed weapons that can shatter moons, deployed shields that can withstand stellar explosions, and coordinated attacks involving millions of ships across hundreds of star systems. All of it has failed. He paused, studying the human faces around the table. What we have never tried is the impossible. The impossible? Echoed General Volkov of the European Union. Your species has a documented history of achieving victory through means that our tactical computers classify as having 0 probability of success, Silthanor explained. You have individuals who have single-handedly held positions against forces thousands of times larger. You have warriors who have fought while mortally wounded until their objectives were complete. You have civilians who have survived disasters that should have killed every living thing in a 100-kilometer radius. Dr. Foster pulled up historical files on the main display. Images flashed past. A lone soldier holding a bridge against an entire army. Scientists working by candlelight during a siege to complete crucial research. Ordinary people building shelters from wreckage while their cities burned around them. We call it the human factor, she said quietly. The tendency to exceed all rational expectations when faced with impossible odds. Most species, when confronted with certain death, will attempt to minimize losses. Humans have been known to charge straight into certain death and somehow come out victorious. The Federation ambassador nodded. Your military historians speak of something called berserker rage, a psychological state where humans become effectively immune to fear, pain, and rational thought. Our scientists believe this might be the key to fighting an enemy that relies on conventional responses to its attacks. President Morrison looked skeptical. You're talking about sending our people to die in a pointless fury? No, General Martinez interjected, her eyes gleaming with an idea that was forming. They're talking about sending our people to do what humans do best, refuse to accept defeat. She stood, pacing to the large window that looked out over the sprawling metropolis below. Every other species in the galaxy appears to be rational, logical, predictable. They analyze a situation, calculate the odds, and act accordingly. When the odds become impossible, they surrender or retreat. She turned back to face the room. But humans? We have a saying. It's not about the size of the dog in the fight. It's about the size of the fight in the dog. We don't calculate odds, we calculate how to beat the odds. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Director Chen was the first to speak. You're suggesting that our irrationality is actually an advantage? I'm suggesting that our refusal to be rational might be the only thing that can save the galaxy, Martinez replied. Every military engagement the Federation has had with the Devourers has followed predictable patterns. Deploy forces, engage enemy, assess casualties, retreat when losses become unacceptable. Rinse and repeat until extinction. She activated a new display showing human military history. But look at our greatest victories. The Battle of Thermopylae, where 300 Spartans held off hundreds of thousands. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, where civilians with homemade weapons fought the most powerful military in their world. The moon landing, accomplished with computers less powerful than the devices in our pockets. Each time conventional wisdom said it was impossible. Each time humans did it anyway. Ambassador Silthanor's translator crackled as he spoke with what sounded like excitement. This is precisely what our analysis suggested. Your species appears to be capable of entering psychological states that allow you to function despite overwhelming trauma, fear, and physical damage. In some documented cases, humans have continued fighting even after sustaining injuries that should have rendered them unconscious. Dr. Foster pulled up medical files that made several delegates wince. Adrenaline, endorphins, and several other chemical compounds can effectively turn humans into biological machines, focused solely on completing their objectives. The phenomenon has been observed in mothers lifting vehicles to save children, soldiers fighting with severed limbs, and civilians working for days without sleep during disasters. But there's something else, General Martinez added, her voice growing intense. Humans don't just go berserk randomly. We go berserk when something threatens what we care about. And right now, Earth, our families, our children, our future is under threat. The weight of that statement settled over the room. These weren't just discussions about military strategy anymore. They were talking about the survival of everything humans had ever built, everyone they had ever loved. President Morrison stood slowly. What exactly are you proposing? We give them what no other species has, Martinez replied. Warriors who don't know when to quit, tacticians who see opportunity where others see only death, and the kind of stubborn, bloody-minded determination that has carried humanity through ice ages and asteroid impacts. She looked around the room at the faces of Earth's leaders. We show them what happens when you threaten a species that conquered its own planet, not through superior technology, but through sheer refusal to surrender. The vote was unanimous. For the first time in human history, Earth would go to war not for territory or resources, but for the right of life itself to exist in the universe. The first human fleet to leave Earth's solar system was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. While Federation ships were sleek, efficient marvels of engineering, designed for maximum performance with minimal risk, the human vessels looked like they had been built in shipyards run by madmen. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching the alien fleet formations through the viewport. The Federation ships maintained perfect spacing, their movements coordinated to the microsecond by quantum computers. In contrast, the human ships moved in what their alien allies could only describe as aggressive chaos, close enough to provide mutual support, far enough apart to avoid being trapped by a single attack. Federation. Command is requesting we maintain standard formation protocols. Reported Lieutenant Commander Park from the communication station. Rodriguez smiled grimly. Tell them we appreciate the suggestion, but we'll stick with what works for us. Admiral Theclon appeared on the main screen, his forearms gesturing with what the humans had learned to recognize as extreme anxiety. Captain Rodriguez, your formation appears to have no discernible pattern. How do you coordinate defensive actions? We don't, Rodriguez replied simply. Each ship captain makes their own decisions based on the situation. We call it controlled chaos. The alien admiral's translator struggled with several concepts in that statement. The idea of military units operating without centralized coordination was so foreign to Federation thinking that their language didn't have proper words for it. But how do you ensure optimal resource allocation and minimize casualties? Theclon asked. We don't minimize casualties, Rodriguez said, her voice growing hard. We maximize damage to the enemy. Sometimes those are the same thing, sometimes they're not. Before the Admiral could respond, alerts began blaring across both fleets. The Devourers had arrived. The enemy force materialized at the edge of sensor range like a cancer growing in space itself. Where normal ships had discrete boundaries, the Devourer vessels seemed to blur into the vacuum around them, their edges constantly shifting as if reality itself was uncertain about where they ended and space began. Federation Fleet. Assume defensive formation Beta 7. Admiral Theclon broadcast on all channels. Maintain optimal firing distance and prepare for coordinated withdrawal when casualties reach 15%. Rodriguez cut into the communications channel. Human fleet, you heard the man. Let's show these things what 15% casualties really looks like. What followed would be studied by military historians for centuries. The Federation fleet executed a textbook defensive engagement, their ships moving in perfect coordination to establish overlapping fields of fire while maintaining escape routes. Their weapons were more advanced than anything humans had ever built, and their tactical computers calculated the optimal firing solutions with inhuman precision. It should have been a massacre in their favor. Instead, it was a massacre, but not the kind anyone expected. The Devourers had faced Federation tactics thousands of times. Their adaptive technology analyzed the standard defensive patterns within minutes, neutralizing the energy weapons and turning the Federation's coordination against them. Ships that had been perfectly positioned for mutual support found themselves perfectly positioned to be destroyed by chain reactions. But the human ships? The Devourers' computers couldn't predict what they would do, because the humans themselves didn't know what they would do until they did it. The UES Fury, a destroyer that should have been supporting the main battle line, suddenly accelerated straight toward the largest Devourer ship. Captain James Mitchell had noticed that the alien vessel's adaptive shields seemed to lag slightly when facing multiple simultaneous attacks from different angles. Mitchell, what the hell are you doing? Rodriguez demanded over the comm. Testing a theory. Mitchell replied calmly as his ship dove through a barrage of weapons fire that should have vaporized him. If I'm right, their shields need 0.2 seconds to adapt to new threat vectors. He was wrong. It only took them 0.1 seconds, but Mitchell had expected to be wrong about something, so he had prepared for it. As the Devourer shields adapted to his approach vector, he ejected his entire payload of nuclear warheads and used his ship's emergency thrusters to change course by 90 degrees. The Devourer shields, having adapted to block attacks from his previous vector, were completely unprepared for the nuclear detonations that came from behind while they were focused on his new position. The explosion tore a hole in the massive ship's defenses that the rest of the human fleet immediately exploited. Did you just use your own ship as bait to trick their computers? Rodriguez asked in amazement. Seemed like a good idea at the time. Mitchell replied as he brought his battered destroyer around for another attack run. Admiral Teclon watched in horror and fascination as the humans continued to do impossible things. A human heavy cruiser, the UES Warhammer, had lost its main engines but was still fighting by using controlled explosions to maneuver, turning its ammunition stores into an improvised propulsion system. Another human ship, the UES Last Stand, had been boarded by devourer assault creatures. Instead of following standard protocol and evacuating the crew, the humans had sealed the blast doors and were hunting the invaders through their own ship's corridors. The aliens' superior technology meant nothing in confined spaces against humans armed with shotguns and an intimate knowledge of their own ship's layout. "This is madness," whispered one of Teclon's tactical officers. "No," the admiral replied, his eyes fixed on the tactical display where the seemingly random human attacks were slowly but systematically destroying ships that had been considered invincible. "This is evolution." The battle's turning point came when Captain Rodriguez made a decision that defied every principle of space combat. Instead of maintaining safe distance while trading fire, she ordered the UES Defiance to ram the largest devourer ship. "Captain, that's suicide," her tactical officer protested. "Maybe," Rodriguez agreed, studying the massive alien vessel that was already adapting to counter their weapons, "but suicide works both ways." What the devourers hadn't expected was that humans had been building their ships differently than Federation vessels. Where alien ships were designed for maximum efficiency and minimal damage, human ships were built like the weapons of a species that had learned warfare in trenches and foxholes. The UES Defiance didn't just ram the devourer ship, it kept going. Its reinforced prow, designed specifically for ramming attacks that Federation engineers had dismissed as primitive, tore through the alien vessel's hull like an armor-piercing bullet. Rodriguez had turned her entire ship into a kinetic weapon, and the devourers had no adaptation for sheer, brutal physics. As the Defiance's reactor overloaded deep inside the enemy ship, Rodriguez broadcast her final message to the fleet. "Remember, we're not trying to win pretty. We're trying to win." The explosion took both ships, but the psychological effect on the remaining devourers was immediate and profound. For the first time in their existence, they had encountered an enemy that would choose mutual destruction over surrender. The human fleet, reduced to half its original numbers, continued fighting with undimmed ferocity. They had learned something important. The devourers could adapt to any weapon, any strategy, any tactic, but they couldn't adapt to an enemy that was willing to die to kill them. Admiral Teclon, watching the tactical display as the remaining human ships pressed their attack, despite catastrophic losses, finally understood what the ancient texts had meant when they described humans as beautiful monsters. They weren't just fighting to win. They were fighting to ensure that if they lost, they took their enemies with them. Word of the human victory spread through the galaxy faster than light-speed communications. For the first time since the Devourers had appeared, an alien force had been not just stopped but completely annihilated. The implications rippled through every Federation world like shockwaves from a stellar explosion. On the ocean world of Aquanus, the dolphin-like cetaceans gathered in their great underwater cities to discuss this impossible news. Their philosophy had always centered on harmony and adaptation, flowing with the currents of existence rather than fighting against them. The idea of a species that would rather die than yield was so foreign to their nature that they created entirely new words to describe it. The humans call it victory or death, I reported their ambassador to the Federation Council, but our linguists believe the more accurate translation would be victory through death. They appear to view their own destruction as simply another weapon to be deployed. Meanwhile, on the crystal spires of New Thessalia, the analytical minds of the synthetic, collective, beings who had uploaded their consciousness to quantum computers millennia ago, were running calculations that broke their most sophisticated probability models. Every simulation they ran of the battle came back with the same impossible result: the humans should have died. Within the first 30 minutes, their tactical decisions violate the fundamental principles of self-preservation, reported the collective's prime node to the emergency session of the Federation High Command. They consistently chose actions that increased their probability of death, while only marginally improving their chances of achieving mission objectives. Chancellor Vexhai, presiding over the session from her seat in the Great Assembly Hall, raised a scaled hand for silence, And yet they achieved total victory against a force that destroyed our best fleets. How do we reconcile this contradiction? The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Kihtar, an elderly Zelthani psychologist who had spent decades studying the human psychological profiles in the Federation archives, rose on trembling tentacles to address the assembly. "We have been thinking about this incorrectly," she announced, her voice thin but carrying clearly through the translation systems. "We assumed the humans were accepting death as a side effect of their tactics, but that's not what happened at all." She activated the holographic display, showing detailed recordings of the battle. "Look at their communications during the engagement. Captain Rodriguez didn't say 'I'm willing to die to complete the mission.' She said, 'Remember, we're not trying to win pretty.' They weren't embracing death. They were embracing victory through any means necessary." The distinction seemed subtle, but as Dr. Kihtar explained, it represented a fundamental difference in thinking that separated humans from every other known species. "Every Federation species has built-in psychological limiters," she continued. "When the probability of death reaches a certain threshold, our survival instincts override our mission objectives. It's how evolution works. The creatures who prioritize survival over objectives are the ones who live to reproduce. But humans appear to have evolved a different solution. Instead of developing better survival instincts, they developed the ability to override those instincts entirely when the stakes become high enough. They can literally choose to ignore their own mortality." Admiral Theclon, attending virtually from the Federation fleet, confirmed her analysis. "During the battle, we monitored their biometric data. The human crews were experiencing massive adrenaline surges, elevated heart rates, and stress responses that should have impaired their judgment. Instead, their performance improved. This revelation prompted a galaxy-wide reassessment of human military doctrine. The Federation's greatest military minds began studying human warfare in detail, finding pattern after pattern of the same phenomenon. Human soldiers in Earth's history had regularly performed feats that their own training manuals classified as impossible, but it was the psychological implications that truly shook the galactic community. If humans could simply decide to ignore death, what else might they be capable of ignoring? Fear? Pain? The very laws of physics? The answer came sooner than anyone expected. 3 weeks after the first battle, long-range sensors detected another Devourer fleet approaching the Kepler system, home to 2 billion Federation citizens. This force was 3 times larger than the one the humans had destroyed, suggesting that the Devourers had adapted their strategy to account for human unpredictability. The Federation fleet that moved to intercept them included both human and alien vessels. But this time the roles were reversed. Instead of humans learning Federation tactics, the aliens were trying to learn human ones. Captain Sarah Kim of the UES Retribution found herself in the unprecedented position of teaching a Korthek battlecruiser captain how to think irrationally. "I don't understand the concept," admitted Captain Forthak through the translation system. "You want me to make decisions that reduce my probability of survival?" "No," Kim replied patiently. "I want you to make decisions that increase your probability of completing the mission, regardless of your probability of survival. There's a difference. But if we die, we cannot complete future missions," Forthak pointed out with impeccable logic. "True," Kim agreed. "But if we don't complete this mission, there won't be any future missions for anyone." The philosophical implications of that statement sparked heated debates across every Federation ship. Alien crews found themselves grappling with concepts that had no equivalent in their languages or cultures. How do you teach rationality to a species that prided itself on perfect logic? How do you explain the value of senseless sacrifice to beings who had optimized themselves for maximum efficiency? The answer, as it turned out, was not through logic at all. When the Devourer fleet arrived, the Federation ships initially attempted to implement human-style tactics. They tried to attack unpredictably, to take unnecessary risks, to ignore optimal casualty ratios. The results were disastrous: confusion, friendly fire incidents, and tactical chaos that the Devourers exploited ruthlessly. But then something unexpected happened. As the Federation fleet began to take heavy casualties, their crews started to witness something they had only heard about in reports. Humans fighting not just without regard for their own safety, but with active joy in the face of mortal danger. Commander Jackson Walsh, captain of the light cruiser UES Fury, was laughing as he piloted his ship through a storm of weapons fire that was steadily reducing his vessel to scrap metal. His crew, instead of panicking as any rational beings would, was cheering each successful hit they scored against the enemy. "Are your people insane?" demanded Captain Vorthak as he watched the human ship perform maneuvers that no computer would ever recommend. "Probably," Kim replied cheerfully as she ordered her own ship into an attack run that her tactical computer was frantically flagging as suicide. "But we're the kind of insane that wins wars." And suddenly, watching the humans fight with laughter in their voices and songs on their lips as their ships burned around them, the alien crews began to understand something that couldn't be taught through manuals or training exercises. The humans weren't ignoring death. They were treating the entire battle as if it were a game. A deadly, serious game with the highest possible stakes, but still a game that they were determined to enjoy playing. For the first time in Federation history, alien crews began to exhibit something their psychologists had never documented before. They began to have fun while fighting for their lives. The psychological transformation of the Federation fleets happened faster than anyone thought possible. Within hours of witnessing humans treat mortal combat like a deadly sport, alien crews across the fleet began exhibiting behaviors their species had never recorded before. Captain Silvana, a cetacean commander whose people had evolved in the peaceful depths of ocean worlds, found herself ordering attack patterns that her training classified as creatively suicidal. But instead of the panic her crew should have felt, they responded with something their language had no word for, the same fierce joy they had seen in human voices during battle. "Torpedo spread pattern Chaos 7, she ordered, using a human tactical designation that roughly translated to, "Let's see what happens when we fire everything in different directions." Her weapons officer, a normally cautious individual who had never fired a shot in anger before this war, actually laughed as he complied. "Chaos 7 locked in, Captain. The enemy will never see this coming because we don't know what's coming either." The results were spectacular. The Devourer adaptive systems designed to counter logical attack patterns found themselves facing something they had never encountered. Tactical decisions made for the sheer joy of making them. Commander Walsh, despite his ship being reduced to little more than a weapons platform held together by emergency patches and stubborn determination, continued his running commentary that was being broadcast across the entire fleet. "Folks, we've lost main engines, secondary engines, and I'm pretty sure that last hit took out our coffee machine, which frankly is the real tragedy here," he announced cheerfully as his ship spun through space, firing its remaining weapons in all directions. "But we've still got attitude thrusters and a really impressive grudge against these reality-eating jerks." The effect of his words on the alien crews was immediate and profound. They began to understand that humans didn't just fight differently, they thought differently about what fighting meant. Where other species saw war as a grim necessity, humans saw it as the ultimate test of their ingenuity, determination, and spirit. Dr. Kihatar, monitoring the psychological profiles of the mixed crews from the safety of the fleet command ship, was recording phenomena that would revolutionize xenopsychology. Alien beings were exhibiting emotional responses that their species had never evolved, adopting human attitudes toward risk and danger that should have been impossible for their neural architectures. "They're not just copying human tactics," she reported to Admiral Teclon in amazement. "They're becoming temporarily human in their thinking patterns. It's as if the human approach to warfare is somehow contagious." The Admiral nodded grimly. "Is that dangerous?" "I have no idea," Dr. Kitar admitted. "But at this point, dangerous is working better than safe ever did." The battle reached its climax when the largest Devourer ship, a massive entity that seemed to bend space around itself, began employing a new tactic. Instead of trying to destroy the Federation fleet, it started to simply absorb the ship's hull, adding their mass to its own structure. 3 Federation vessels vanished into the creature's distorted hull before anyone could react. The rational response would have been immediate withdrawal to prevent further losses. Instead, Captain Kim had a different idea. "All ships, this is retribution actual," she announced. "That thing wants to eat our ships? Let's give it something that'll give it indigestion." What followed was a coordinated attack that defied every principle of space combat ever developed. Instead of trying to avoid the Devourer's absorption field, the Federation fleet charged directly into it, but they did so with their reactor cores set to overload. "You're going to fly into that thing and detonate?" Admiral Thecklon asked in horror. "Not just us," Kim replied with the kind of cheerful determination that had become the human trademark. "Everyone who can spare a ship. We're going to make that thing wish it had never learned to eat." The volunteer list was overwhelming. Ships from every Federation species lined up to participate in what they had started calling the kamikaze buffet. The term came from human military history and referred to suicide attacks designed to cause maximum damage to the enemy. But as Captain Kim explained to her mixed human-alien crew, it wasn't really suicide if you were planning to take the enemy with you. Besides, she added with a grin that her alien crew members had learned to find both terrifying and inspiring, "We're not planning to die. We're planning to make the biggest explosion in this star system and see if we can surf the shockwave to safety." The plan was insane. The execution was perfect. 17 ships from 7 different species flew directly into the Devourer's absorption field, their crews singing human battle songs that they didn't fully understand but felt in their bones. As each ship was consumed, its overloading reactor added to the growing energy buildup within the creature's distorted interior. The explosion, when it came, was visible from 3 star systems away. The massive Devourer ship didn't just die, it came apart in a cascade of energy releases that tore holes in space itself. The resulting shockwave destroyed 2 more Devourer vessels and sent the remainder of the enemy fleet fleeing in what could only be described as panic. Of the 17 ships that had volunteered for the suicide run, 4 somehow survived. Captain Kim's prediction about surfing the shockwave had been more accurate than anyone had expected. The crews that emerged from the destruction were changed beings, aliens who had discovered that there were things worth dying for, and therefore worth living for as well. But the most significant change wasn't in the survivors of the attack. It was in the Federation crews who had watched their comrades willingly fly into certain death while singing songs of defiance. For the first time in galactic history, alien species began to develop their own versions of the human concept of heroism. The cetaceans created poems about swimming into the dark depths to bring light to others. The synthetic collective developed algorithms for self-sacrifice that prioritized mission success over individual preservation. Even the pragmatic Korthek began, teaching their young about the honor of standing firm when retreat would mean abandoning those who trusted you. The humans had given the galaxy something more dangerous than new weapons or superior tactics. They had given them the idea that some things were more important than survival. And across the galaxy, ancient devourer intelligences that had consumed 1,000 civilizations began to realize that they had encountered something they had never faced before. An enemy that grew stronger with each defeat, more determined with each loss, and more dangerous precisely because they had learned to stop being afraid of dying. The war was about to enter a phase that neither side had anticipated. The Devourer retreat marked the beginning of what historians would later call the Great Awakening. Across the galaxy, Federation species began exhibiting behaviors that their own scientists couldn't explain. Peaceful civilizations started developing warrior traditions. Logical species began making decisions based on intuition and emotion. Most disturbing of all, beings who had spent millennia optimizing for efficiency and safety suddenly started taking unnecessary risks simply because those risks felt important. Dr. Kitar found herself overwhelmed with reports from every Federation world. On Zelthani Prime, tentacled philosophers were debating the concept of beautiful futility, the idea that some actions were worthwhile precisely because they served no logical purpose. On the crystal cities of New Thessalia, artificial intelligences were experimenting with random number generators in their decision-making processes, trying to achieve what they called beneficial irrationality. "It's spreading like a virus," she reported to the emergency session of the Federation Council. "But it's not a disease, it's evolution in real time. Entire species are developing psychological characteristics they never had before." Chancellor Vexhai studied the reports with a mixture of fascination and concern. "Are they becoming human?" "No," Dr. Kiatar replied thoughtfully. "They're becoming themselves, but with human additions. The cetaceans are still peaceful and flowing, but now they're peaceful warriors. The Korthek are still logical, but now they practice logical recklessness. It's as if humanity has provided a missing piece that every species needed, but never knew they lacked. The implications were staggering. For thousands of years, galactic civilization had been built on the principle of careful, measured progress. Risk was minimized, casualties were avoided, and rational thinking guided every decision. It had created a stable, prosperous society that had survived for millennia. It had also created a society that was completely unprepared for an enemy that didn't follow rational patterns. On Earth, the reports from across the galaxy were creating their own kind of revolution. The human government found itself in the unprecedented position of being asked to teach other species how to be irrational. They want us to establish military training programs, reported General Martinez to the Earth Defense Council. Not just tactics or strategy, but psychological conditioning. They want to learn how to think like humans when the situation calls for it. President Morrison shook her head in amazement. 6 months ago, they classified us as too dangerous for their galactic community. Now they want to become like us? Not become like us, Martinez clarified. Learn from us. There's a difference. They're not trying to stop being themselves. They're trying to add human flexibility to their existing strengths. The first interspecies training programs were established on a dozen different worlds, each adapted to the specific psychology of the species involved. Human instructors found themselves in the surreal position of teaching alien warriors how to ignore their own survival instincts. Captain Rodriguez, who had survived the ramming of her ship by ejecting in an escape pod at the last second, found herself on Korthek Prime, trying to explain the concept of calculated stupidity to a class of chitinous warriors whose entire culture was built on logical analysis. The key, she explained to her bewildered students, is not to stop thinking. It's to think about different things. Instead of thinking, how do I survive this? Think, how do I accomplish the mission? Instead of, what are the odds of success? Think, what would success look like? One of her students, a veteran Korthek commander named Kliktar, raised a claw in confusion. But if we do not consider survival odds, how do we ensure optimal resource allocation for future engagements? Rodriguez grinned. That's the beautiful part, you don't. You win this engagement so decisively that future engagements become easier. Every time you refuse to lose, you make your enemy a little more afraid, a little less confident, a little more likely to make mistakes. The training programs yielded results faster than anyone had expected. Within weeks, Federation fleets were reporting tactical innovations that their computers classified as impossibly effective. Alien crews were developing their own versions of human battle cries, their own rituals for managing fear and channeling aggression. But the real breakthrough came when the synthetic collective made an announcement that shocked the galactic community. We have successfully integrated irrationality algorithms into our core programming, reported Prime Node Zeta 7 to the Federation Assembly. We can now simulate human-type decision-making when conventional analysis proves insufficient. The implications were staggering. The synthetics represented the pinnacle of logical thinking, artificial minds that could process information and calculate probabilities faster than any biological brain. If they had found ways to intentionally think illogically, they might have solved one of the fundamental problems with fighting the Devourers. Show us, Chancellor Vexahai requested. Prime Node Zeta 7 activated a holographic display showing a typical engagement scenario. Conventional analysis indicates optimal strategy is to maintain defensive positions and trade fire at maximum range until enemy withdraws or our casualties reach unacceptable levels. The display shifted, showing the same scenario with new variables. Irrationality algorithm suggests ignore defensive positions close to point-blank range and focus all fire on single target regardless of optimal target distribution. That would result in massive casualties. Admiral Theclon protested. 73% probability of total fleet loss, Zeta 7 agreed cheerfully. However, it also results in 100% certainty of destroying at least one enemy ship, which conventional tactics cannot guarantee. The psychological impact on remaining enemy forces is incalculable but historically significant. Dr. Kitar leaned forward in her seat. You're learning to think in terms of victory conditions rather than survival conditions. Precisely, Zeta 7 confirmed. Humans appear to evaluate success based on mission completion rather than unit preservation. This allows for tactical options that other species cannot consider. The first test of these new hybrid tactics came sooner than expected. The Devourers, apparently realizing that their enemy had somehow become more dangerous, launched a massive assault on the Federation's industrial center in the Proxima Centauri system. The fleet that responded included ships and crews that represented something entirely new in galactic history. Beings who had learned to balance the best of their own nature with the most useful aspects of human psychology. Captain Silvana led a squadron of cetacean ships that moved through space like schools of fish, but fish with teeth and an appetite for violence. Commander Vorthak commanded Korthik vessels that attacked with mathematical precision, but precision aimed at achieving impossible objectives. The synthetic ships calculated optimal irrationality, using quantum computers to generate the perfect amount of unpredictability, and scattered throughout the fleet were human ships, their crews watching in amazement as their alien allies began to exhibit the same fierce joy in combat that had once been uniquely human. "Look at them," whispered Captain Walsh as he watched a cetacean destroyer perform a maneuver that he would have called suicidal 6 months ago. "They're not trying to be us. They're trying to be the best possible versions of themselves." The battle that followed would reshape the galaxy's understanding of what was possible when different species learned from each other instead of simply coexisting. But more importantly, it would prove that humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy wasn't their weapons or their tactics. It was their refusal to accept that anything was truly impossible. The final battle began not with the thunderous clash of fleets, but with something the galaxy had never witnessed before. Laughter echoing across a dozen different species as they prepared to face extinction with joy in their hearts. The devourer force that emerged at the edge of the Proxima Centauri system was the largest ever recorded, a writhing mass of reality-distorting ships that seemed to consume light itself. Long-range sensors counted over 10,000 vessels, each one capable of devastating entire star systems. The Federation fleet that rose to meet them numbered barely 300 ships. "Well," announced Captain Walsh from his rebuilt destroyer, "I'd say the odds are about right for a fair fight." His comment, broadcast across all fleet channels, was met with a chorus of agreement from beings who 6 months ago would have calculated the probability of survival and immediately requested reinforcements. Instead, alien crews were checking their weapons, saying prayers to gods they had never worshipped before, and composing what humans called death songs, final messages that celebrated the chance to fight rather than mourning the likelihood of defeat. Admiral Theclon, commanding the fleet from his massive dreadnought, found himself looking at tactical displays that showed impossible attack vectors being planned by crews that had learned to ignore mathematical probability. His own tactical officers, once the most logical beings in the galaxy, were proposing strategies that violated every principle of space combat. "Admiral," reported his weapons officer with barely contained excitement, "the human squadron is requesting permission to execute what they call Plan Omega." Theclon had learned to be wary of human plans with dramatic names. "What does Plan Omega involve?" "Flying directly into the center of the enemy formation and detonating our reactor cores simultaneously." "And the backup plan?" "That is the backup plan, sir. Plan Alpha involves ramming speed." Before Theclon could respond, Chancellor Vexhi's voice crackled over the command channel from her position safely behind the main battle line. "Admiral, you are authorized to deploy any tactics you deem necessary. The Federation Council has voted unanimously. We refuse to surrender our civilization to an enemy that doesn't understand what civilization means." The battle began with the Devourers doing exactly what they always did, deploying in perfect formations, analyzing Federation defensive positions, and preparing to systematically dismantle their opponents with overwhelming firepower and adaptive technology. What they didn't expect was for the Federation fleet to completely ignore their own defensive positions and charge straight into the heart of the enemy formation. Captain Rodriguez, back in command of a new ship called the UES Inevitable, led the first wave. Her ship had been built specifically for ramming attacks, armored like a battering ram and equipped with engines that could accelerate it to impossible speeds. But she wasn't alone. Beside her flew ships from every Federation species, each one modified to match the aggressive tactics their crews had learned from humanity. "Remember," she broadcast to the mixed fleet. "We're not here to trade shots until someone gives up. We're here to end this war in the next 30 minutes. The collision was spectacular. Federation ships struck the Devourer formation like a hammer blow, their crews screaming battle cries in languages that had never known words for such fierce joy. The enemy's adaptive systems, designed to counter logical attack patterns, found themselves facing something they couldn't adapt to, an enemy that was adapting faster than their technology could track. Human ships used their armored prows to tear through enemy hulls while alien vessels deployed, weapons that had been redesigned for point-blank combat. The cetacean torpedo boats moved like living things through the chaos, their crews singing songs about swimming through starfire. The synthetic ships calculated perfect moments for self-sacrifice, their artificial minds achieving a kind of digital enlightenment as they chose destruction in service of victory. But it was the Korthek heavy cruisers that provided the most shocking display. These logical, mathematical beings had developed their own version of berserker rage, a state they called calculated fury, where they maintained perfect tactical awareness while abandoning all concern for their own survival. Commander Vorthak, his ship's hull glowing red-hot from weapon impacts, broadcast a message that would be remembered for generations. "Today we fight not as separate species but as children of the same galaxy. Today we show these devourers what happens when the impossible becomes inevitable." The psychological impact on the devourers was immediate and catastrophic. For the first time in their existence, they faced an enemy that seemed to grow stronger as they took damage, more determined as their losses mounted. Every Federation ship that died took multiple devourer vessels with it, and the survivors fought harder rather than surrendering. Dr. Kietar, monitoring the battle from the command ship, was recording psychological phenomena that redefined her understanding of consciousness itself. "The crews are exhibiting collective consciousness effects," she reported in amazement. "They're not just fighting as individuals anymore, they're fighting as a single organism with thousands of minds focused on one objective." The turning point came when Captain Rodriguez made her final sacrifice. The UES Inevitable, damaged beyond repair but still functional, accelerated toward the largest Devourer ship, a massive entity that seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time. "This is for everyone who never got the chance to fight back," she announced, calmly as her ship's reactor began to overload. "And for everyone who'll get the chance because we were here today." The explosion tore a hole in reality itself. The massive Devourer ship didn't just die, it collapsed into a gravitational anomaly that pulled 3 more enemy vessels into destructive chaos. The psychological shockwave that followed was even more devastating to the Devourer fleet. For creatures that had never encountered defeat, the sight of their most powerful ship being destroyed by a single enemy vessel was incomprehensible. The remaining Devourer ships began to withdraw, their adaptive systems unable to process an enemy that viewed mutual destruction as victory. But the Federation fleet wasn't finished. Led by Captain Walsh and his battered destroyer, the survivors pursued the retreating enemy, their crews singing songs of triumph even as their ships fell apart around them. "Pursuit course laid in," announced Walsh's navigator with the kind of cheerful determination that had become the hallmark of the new galactic military doctrine. "Sir," his tactical officer pointed out, "we don't have enough fuel to return to base if we continue the pursuit." "Then I guess we'd better make sure we finish this," Walsh replied with a grin. The final moments of the battle were witnessed by monitoring stations across 3 star systems. A handful of Federation ships, outnumbered 1,000 to 1, chased the retreating Devourer fleet to the edge of known space. The last transmission received was Walsh's voice, singing an old human song about going down swinging, joined by the voices of his alien crew members who had learned that some things were worth more than survival. The Devourers never returned. Long-range sensors tracked their retreat beyond the galaxy's edge, their ships fleeing into the empty void between galaxies as if afraid that the madness of their enemies might follow them, even there. In the aftermath, as rescue ships searched for survivors and the galaxy began to process what had happened, Chancellor Vexai stood before the Federation Assembly to deliver a speech that would reshape galactic civilization. "We called upon humanity in our darkest hour," she said, her voice carrying to every world in Federation space. "We thought we were asking for their weapons, their tactics, their willingness to fight. What we received was something far more valuable. We received their refusal to accept defeat." She gestured to the mixed crews of humans and aliens who had survived the final battle, beings who had been forever changed by learning that courage was contagious and that hope could be a weapon more powerful than any technology. The humans have given us victory, but more than that, they have given us the knowledge that victory was always possible. We simply had to be willing to pay its price. The galaxy would never be the same. The Devourers were gone, but the spirit they had awakened in the Federation would endure. Across 1,000 worlds, children of dozens of species would grow up learning human songs about heroes who laughed in the face of death. Alien poets would write verses about the beauty of impossible odds, and military academies would teach courses on optimal irrationality and productive stubbornness. Humanity had saved the galaxy not by being the strongest or the smartest, but by being the most human, and in doing so, they had taught every other species how to be more than they ever thought possible. The age of careful, measured progress was over. The age of magnificent impossibility had begun.